All right, so we're live today with O'Reilly author Anna. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Anna Skoulikari, and I recently wrote a book called Learning Git, a hands-on and visual guide to the basics of Git. I'm looking at it right now. I brought it with me. And yeah, this is a Git basics book, um, and I'm excited to talk about it. Um, yeah, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, perfect. I think the topic of learning Git is actually probably one of the best topics you could write a book on because I've found teaching for the last several years that one of the skills that is the least taught at the university level, even elite level universities, is Git. And it's a skill that is very useful, and not only just useful, but necessary for people. So maybe that would be a good question for you is, why did you write it?
Yeah, let me tell you a little bit about my background, and that kind of leads into the story of how I ended up writing this book. So I entered the world of tech through UX design. I did a UX design boot camp back when I was living in London, and I ended up getting a job as a UX designer, where obviously I learned how to design apps and websites, and I found that fascinating. But at some point, I got really curious about how are these apps and websites actually built? Like, what do the programmers do once they get the wireframes? And so when I moved to Barcelona, which is where I'm joining you from right now, I decided to do a coding boot camp and to learn some of the basics of coding. And I did a web development boot camp. Um, Obviously, during the web development boot camp, they taught us a couple Git basics, but honestly, they only spent like 10 minutes, maybe maximum half an hour. And it was git add, git commit, git push. So once you start working as a developer, you realize that that's not enough. You need to know a bit more. So out of that boot camp, I ended up getting a job as a front end dev. And that's where I ended up being in a team where I had to work with a bunch of other developers, and I was terrified of Git. I just felt like anytime I had to do something that was complicated in a repository, I was going to destroy the repository. I was going to take down the site. I was so worried, and I always had to call on the senior developers to come and help me. And so at some point, I just thought, I'm going to conquer my fear. I'm going to really learn how Git works, learn the basics really well, um, so that I can be independent in my work and that I can have confidence when I work with Git. So I started learning Git and reaching out, finding a bunch of online resources, reading books. And that's when I realized that the way Git was taught was not geared towards people like myself that had transitioned from a non-technical background into a technical background. There were amazing Git resources out there. They just weren't designed for people like me. And also, for me, the way my brain works, I'm a very visual learner. I like to learn things hands-on. So I'm not the kind of person that's been coding since they were 15, and I'm not the kind of person that even coding comes completely natural to. So I realized that I could teach Git in a simpler way. And this creative idea came to me of how I could teach Git using colors and storytelling. So that led me to actually build an online course. I created an online course teaching the basics of Git. And while I was making that online course, I always knew I actually wanted to write a book. But the barrier to entry to create an online course was a lot lower than the barrier to entry to write a book. And so I thought, okay, I'll first create an online course, see how that goes, get feedback from my learners, and see if the way that I teach actually resonates with them and makes sense. And that course is on Udemy. People can find it. And then once I started getting the reviews from the online course and realizing that people loved the way that I used colors and visuals in order to teach it in a simple way, that's when I thought, okay, I'm ready to write this book. Let's do it. And yeah, the book writing journey commenced from there. Um, so yeah, that's kind of how I ended up writing a book teaching Git.
Well, that's a great origin story. I would say that's probably the best possible way to write a book is that you identify something you want to learn, and then you or that you just learned, and then you articulate it into maybe even some other form of content first
Yeah.
to kind of flesh it out, and then you turn it into a book. I think that's a very good formula.
So the amazing thing about writing this book is that it was a very organic process because I was writing this book for me. And initially, I thought I was writing this book for myself when I went to the coding boot camp for Anna on the first day of the coding boot camp back in 2018. Um, and in part, I did write that book for that version of myself. But actually, I've also realized that I wrote this book for me when I joined my job as a front end dev, as a junior front end developer. This book is designed for someone that has just gone to a company and realizes they actually really need to learn the basics of Git really well. Um, and so while I was writing this book, it was so easy to just remember what I found confusing at that point, what things did I not know about at that point. So, for example, when I went to the coding bootcamp, I'd never opened the terminal in my computer. I had no idea what it was, how to work with it, how the file system worked. So those are things I've designed this book for absolute beginners. I mean, it still will serve people that have some experience and, people that are already use Git or are already technical, but it's also designed for absolute beginners because I take it from like zero, from you've never opened your command line. You've never made a directory. Um, so yeah, it was really interesting because writing this book was just like writing a book for a past version of myself. That does not mean that I didn't need to use or test it a bunch, because obviously there's still things that you forget or, um, yeah, you overlook when creating a teaching resource. But yeah, it was I was really lucky to be in the situation where I was the target audience, at least a past version of myself was.
No, since I've retired writing books, I can give the truth about some of the things that I learned writing books, and one of them is that uh, actually a lot of books I wrote, I wasn't, I would consider like an expert on the topic that I wrote. I mean, again, this is 10 books I wrote, so I can be totally honest. Like a lot of topics I didn't really know as well as I wished I knew. And I think that's actually the ideal scenario is for the author to have a beginner's mind and to say, wow, I need to know this, or I need to know this, because the perspective of being empathetic with the person that's reading your content is, I think, a superior way to write a book versus sometimes if you ask someone who is a deep, deep, deep expert on something, they're not trying to be mean to you. They just can't explain it. And I'll give you an example. I did Brazilian Jiu Jitsu for 10 years. And one of the coaches I had was at one point had fought for the world championship in the UFC and like was one of the best people in the world at jiu-jitsu. And I mean, he was still very talented in his late 30s. Like, I mean, he could compete with some of the best people in the world. When I would ask him about some technique, I would say, hey, well, how do you do this and this? He would explain to me. I just no idea what he's saying. So, but I went to one of his students who was like his protege, and the student was still a beginner, and he was like, yeah, do this and this and this and this. And it wasn't that he was trying to mislead me. It's just that his expertise was so deep that he couldn't even understand how to explain the depth of his skill anymore. He was too good.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot to be said about reading books written by first time authors like the one you've written, and that you're writing it for a beginner, because I think that's the sweet spot.
Yeah. So I definitely think that the fact that learning these types of things doesn't come extremely naturally to me has helped me in my teaching approach because it does mean that in order to teach it, I need to first really understand it myself and I have to explain it to myself in a really simple way. And so, yeah, that's been like a little superpower. And the other thing I can say is that this book really is the Git basics. I mean, I am specialized at teaching the basics of Git. Sometimes people talk to me and they're like, "Oh, can you talk about like advanced features of Git?" And I'm like, I am a specialist at teaching Git basics. I don't know everything about Git. it's such a big world and there's so many different features. And I want to be really clear about, where my specialty lies. Um, and also what this book offers, which is that it teaches a mental model of Git and the Git basics, a foundation basically, so that then once you have that foundational mental model in place, you can go on and learn additional things with a very solid mental model in place. What I've found is that there's a lot of people that have a lot of experience using Git, and a lot of developer experience. I mean, people with 5, 10 years of developer experience, but sometimes the mental model of Git that they have is not so accurate or not so helpful. And that's why a lot of people that even have a lot of experience find it scary and get scared that they might lose something or they might do something wrong. Um, so yeah, getting a good foundational model of the basics is really important.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you bring up, and even universal to anything in tech is that there should be a focus on simplicity. And I like, so when I'm teaching a class in a university, a lot of times what I'll say to students is that the goal as you get more experience is to be simpler. So when you're
Yeah.
a beginner, a lot of times you embrace complexity, and then you reach a certain level of complexity and you collapse, and then you feel like you'll never be good at this particular topic. But the problem is that you're embracing complexity. The way
Yeah.
you become an expert is you embrace simplicity, and many times you don't need the things that you're studying. In fact, I would say for programming, really, you need to know functions. You need to know a function that takes some input, does some work, returns back a value. There's other things that are, nice to haves, object oriented programming, concurrency, all these things, but really that's the thing that you should most of the time be spending your time on, is this function kind of concept. So similarly, like whatever other technical field like source control, I agree with you. Like I would even say you should really have a good reason to embrace complexity with source control or anything,
Yeah.
like, because why? If
So
what's the point?
yeah, there's three words that I use to describe the approach that I took with the book, basically, and just the approach that I take with my Git teaching in general. Simple, tangible, and visual. So simple. So throughout my book is a hands-on experiential learning book. So throughout the book, you're working on a repository, and I have these sections called follow along sections where there's steps, and you're literally on your computer following along, doing the steps, putting like executing commands in the command line. Um, and throughout the book, you're working on one repository. It's called the rainbow repository. And what you're doing is you're listing the colors of the rainbow, and every time you add a color, you make a commit. And the diagrams, visual, the diagrams that I have in my book, the commits in those diagrams, every time you make a commit, the commit will have the color of the color you just added to the repository. So a lot of books or resources that teach Git out there use repositories that have code in them. And I just thought, why add that complexity? Git is used by so many different kinds of professionals, whether they're data scientists, front-end devs, back-end devs, developers that use all kinds of different languages, technical writers, even some product managers sometimes have to interact with the Git repository, or even some designers. So why introduce the complexity of having code in the book when what I'm teaching is Git? And I don't need to teach any kind of coding or have like different files with different content in them. So by just using the rainbow, I really simplified the actual repository that you work on. And obviously, using the rainbow was important because color is such an essential part of my teaching methodology. Um, so by having these visuals where each commit has the color that you added when you were making that commit, you're able to kind of remember what you were learning at each part of the book. And also, it's a lot easier to refer to the commits. So instead of saying, refer to commit C9D1H by like the commit hash, I'm just like the orange commit, the red commit, the yellow
Hmm.
commit. And so this is one of the things that really helped me to simplify my approach in teaching it. And then I also make things very tangible. So something that I only found out very late into learning Git, and also discovered that a lot of other people don't know about, is they never actually look at the .git directory, and they never actually take a look inside the .git directory. So in my book, you learn how to see hidden files on your computer. You look at the .git directory. You learn about how that kind of represents the local repository. You learn, you actually look at, like, what is the staging area? Let's look at the index file. The index file basically represents the staging area. Or for example, when I'm teaching branches, I teach you that branches are pointers to commits. I actually get you to open up the file and look at the file that contains the commit hash that a branch is pointing to. And so I really make these things tangible, because sometimes in the world of tech, things just seem so theoretical and intangible, and things happen behind the scenes. And I'm like, no, let's make them explicit. And then the third aspect of my teaching approach is making things visual. So throughout the entire book, there's a section called a visualize it. And the visualize it is showing you what's happening in your Rainbow repository throughout the entire book. And so it's a very visual learning experience. And I actually show you what a branch looks like. I show you what it's like when you have a local repository and a remote repository, and I give a visual representation of everything that I teach within the book.
Yeah,
So
that
yeah.
sounds. I'm actually going to recommend today. I teach a class later this afternoon. I'm going to tell the students to read your book because at Duke we actually have a subscription to O'Reilly. So
Hmm.
students, I can assign them the material. So I'll tell them, hey, you need to read this book
Yeah.
because I think your approach is a very good approach, which is simplify and then also like change things up by giving people essentially like a metaphor or like a new paradigm for looking at things. And visual, I agree, like I there's a lot of things that I feel better at thinking about in a non technical way. Like you could convert things to music or to pictures or to or an analogy. And I think we need a lot more of that versus just pure dry, like, okay, here's some code, like
Yeah.
just boring. Like why not, why not try some new ideas? And also, like you said, I think there I think we overdo the complexity in tech, and that there's a lot to be said even in teaching. I would say the same thing, like where I've heard different student reviews of courses I've taken, and the ones that I like the best are that, wow, this topic was really complex but I was able to understand it because it was really simple. The comments that I take less seriously are like, I understood everything was in class, I wish it was more complex. It's like, thanks.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like you got the point, like, which is I'm not exploding, you with complexity so that you feel
Yeah.
frustrated.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Speaking of the O'Reilly platform, I just wanted to share with anyone that tunes in or listens to this, that I have a link with which you can get 30-day free access to the O'Reilly platform, and you can read my book in 30 days for free. So the coupon code for that link, if you go on to the O'Reilly platform, I think it's Learn Git 23, but I'll also have the link on my LinkedIn profile, and we can maybe share it in this LinkedIn Live event. So yeah, if anybody wants to check out the book for free for 30 days, feel free to use that coupon code or use the link. And yeah, I also think that by using the rainbow um, in my book, it kind of also just made everything more lighthearted. I think Git is a scary topic, and I can totally understand that. I mean, it yeah, a lot of people have a lot of fear around Git, and there's so many memes out there of how it's scary. But I think by using the rainbow and using such a playful storytelling mechanism, it helps people kind of realize that it's not that scary, and we can, if you just get a good mental model of how things work, um, then you can navigate Git with confidence. And
Yeah,
yeah.
you raise a really good point. But oh yeah, so by the way, I did put the link to the code, I think, in the
In the
live stream.
description.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
perfect.
they can get it. But
Amazing.
the what is interesting about Git, and especially from the background that you came from, which is similar to a lot of students that I teach, and even my work experience, that a lot of times it's easy to uh, get into a work relationship where there's a very complex workflow, and
Mm,
Git is one of the ones where, like, it also happens with code, but like Git is one where there could be like a very aggressive person that has designed an aggressive Git workflow, for example, and you're new, and the your basic intuition is like, wow, this is bad and scary, and I don't know what's going on. What's interesting is that that actually may be correct.
mhm.
Actually, the person that created the Git workflow at your company may have actually over engineered it and made it so complex that it's unknowable. And that
Yeah.
your intuition as a beginner is actually good, that like, hey, that was too complex. And I think that's another kind of like little thread when you get into Git, is that once you get experience, and maybe after they're done reading your book, they may feel like, actually, wow, I worked at some places and they were making things complex and they didn't need to.
Yeah. So, I think what you were just saying made me think about the fact that people shouldn't be afraid to question things. So, for example, when I was learning Git, often people represent branches like tree branches, kind of like things are branching off one another. This is usually how things are displayed when you're looking at learning resources or even on the GitHub like UI. You can see that they kind of look like tree branches branching off one another. And when I discovered that branches are just pointers to commits, I was like, wait, but that doesn't make sense with like the whole branching, like tree branch, like image that I have in my head. And so I was so convinced that I had to explain to people that branches don't look like tree branches and that they're just pointers to commits. And kind of to debunk that misconception. But it's scary, because I was new in the world of teaching Git. So I was like, well, should I really go and do something, teach it in a different way than most people are teaching it? Or, for example, another thing that I questioned when I started creating my own Git teaching resources was there's a lot of diagrams out there that depict the working directory, the staging area, and the repository. And I didn't think those diagrams made sense. I thought they were really complicated and they didn't fit with my mental model of Git. And so in the book, I've created a diagram that I call the Git diagram, and it's introduced in chapter 2. And it depicts the working directory, the staging area, the commit history, and the local repository, and your project directory in a completely different way. I use like boxes and it kind of used as more of like a spatial metaphor. Um, and again, I was taking something that other people had taught in kind of the same way for a really long time. And I just thought, I'm going to question and reinvent this. And I just hope it flies and it resonates with people. And luckily, it has resonated with a lot of people. I'm sure there's going to be people out there that doesn't resonate with. But I also do believe that, we all learn in different ways. And my book is for a specific kind of learner, and other kinds of learners might find other resources more helpful. But yeah, so just because things have been done a certain way for a really long time doesn't mean that they always need to be done that way. We can reinvent things.
And yeah, I'm very, I have to admit, I can't wait to read your book. The thing that also it reminds me of is that in teaching just the topic of software engineering, a lot of times at the beginning, one of the things I'll start to talk about is project management. I also talk about organizational behavior, and I think initially sometimes people will say, "Oh, I thought this was a programming class," and the reason initially bring it up is that most of your time when you're working with front end, you're working with back end, or et cetera, is actually communicating with other people. So it's actually not really that you're spending all your time, writing code. You're spending, I would say, maybe 80% of your time communicating with people and working as a team. So Git in particular is the mechanism. It's almost like a chat system. And
Yeah.
and so like if you're being frustrated about some of the things that are happening, in your organization, or that gets too complex, or the software is too complex, it also could highlight the fact that the organizational structure of your company is dysfunctional, and
Mhm.
that actually the like you said, like the way you're explaining it could kind of debunk some of the things that you almost have to unlearn some of the things because there was maybe a dysfunctional team.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so speaking of soft skills, that made me think of something else. And actually, now I realize we never actually said what Git is. I guess most of your audience already knows what Git is, but just in case there's like a couple people tuning in or listening to this and they don't know what Git is, it's a version control system. It's keeps track of all the versions of your code or of your files, and it's used for collaboration. And on the topic of soft skills and of communicating with people, um, I wasn't an island when I wrote this book. I One of the things that I was very focused on when I was writing this book is taking a design approach to it. And in the world of design, you always create a prototype and then you test the prototype and you get user feedback and then you iterate. So I wrote the first draft of the book and then I user tested it. So I don't know. I still need to talk with more authors to find out how many people actually user test their books. And obviously, because my book was a hands on experiential learning book, so you actually make a repository during the book, it's more easy to user test. But I did actually 3 rounds of user testing. Um, Throughout the almost 2 years that I was working on this book. And I think it's one of the things that really helped me to create such a user-friendly learning resource. Um, and that goes back to the idea of soft skills. I mean, you have to, in the world of tech, it's not just about learning technical skills, but also learning how to communicate with people, how to collaborate with people. And for me, the actual user testing of the book was I was looking at the timeline of working on this book, and I realized that um, I wrote the first version of the book in 5 months, and then I spent like 14 months actually editing and user testing and incorporating feedback. So, um, yeah, soft skills are definitely something you should definitely invest in when you're in the world of tech. And learning to collaborate smoothly with other people is essential. If you are, you're probably using Git. And yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting story. I think the longest I've ever spent on a book is a year, and I think your approach is a good approach, though, which is that yeah, now I spend probably 80% of my time doing some kind of content development, and that is really the style I embrace as well, which is that I basically assume what I created is bad, and I'm okay with that fact that it's probably bad, and that it needs input from other people, and that the best thing you can do as an author or creator is to look for people to give you feedback, because they're going to point out something you missed, or and that if you have the open mind where no matter how skilled you think you are, that just the nature of creating things is you're going to create something bad, and that you need to make it less bad until finally it gets good.
Yeah. In total, I think I had almost 40 user testers. I mean, a lot of people helped me and gave me feedback, and people from different backgrounds, UX designers, front-end devs, back-end devs, data scientists, uh, coding bootcamp students, people with a lot of experience, people with little experience. So when you're user testing, you also want like a very diverse background, or at least to cover all of your target audience. Um, and I just remembered a story about the user testing. Um, and this will sort of reveal to people how silly I can be sometimes. But basically, when I first started writing this book, I told you it's very visual. And I wanted to make it a very hands-on book. And so I thought that people would want to actually draw the commits while they're making them on the computer. They would have pen and paper and they would draw them when they would see the diagrams. So in the first draft of my book, in the preface, I told people like grab some colored pencils, grab some paper, and make sure you're ready to draw. And when I did the first round of user testing, I saw nobody was drawing. And I realized it's a cool idea, Anna. Maybe you would have liked to do that as a learner, but people don't want to do that. They're not going to do that. And so, yeah, user testing really does give you feedback on some of your good ideas and some of your bad ideas, or your ideas that don't really work. Um, so yeah, that's a little nugget that I learned while user testing.
You remind me of a different, related topic, which is that a lot of the original people in the software industry got a computer science degree. And I'm almost 50, so I've been around for a while. And I remember that computer science was, we didn't really know that it was going to be a big deal. Like when I was in college, it was like, oh, I like computers, like there wasn't really, you weren't sure what to study, or and then there was a period of time where if you kind of lucked out and accidentally got into the computer science program, is like, oh, look at
Mhm.
you're the only person that's allowed to be a programmer. Now, since then, if we look at some of the research, it shows that the majority of people that are working in the software industry do not have a computer science degree. So I think that's another component of what's missing in education, is that if the majority of people are not getting computer science degrees that are working in the industry, that the approach that you should, learn essentially like advanced math for 4 years, and that's how you learn to be an expert at Git or user design, is just frankly ridiculous, right? Like,
Yeah.
how could that possibly be? There's actually more of like a vocational approach to it. So it just kind of reminded me that, I think there's a big need for books like the book you wrote, and the way of thinking that you're thinking, and even the experience you had, which is going to like a vocational style school,
Yeah.
because in my opinion, that's actually a lot more directly related to what you do in the workplace. A computer science degree isn't obviously going to hurt you, but it actually may not be as directly impactful as the vocational skill in the short term, because that's the thing that you need to do your job.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's true when you realize that now not everyone has a computer science degree, that means that maybe they don't have the same language that when everyone did have a computer science degree, they had all the same language or the same concepts that they learned in school, um, kind of the same things that they were exposed to. And that's exactly what I realized when I was learning Git myself, when I was working as a junior front-end dev, that when I was looking at the learning resources, those learning resources assumed a prior knowledge or a prior experience, which I did not have. So I'll give a really good example. Pro Git, it's my favorite Git book out there. It's the Git Bible. It's an amazing book. And one of the co-authors wrote a quote for my book. So I love that book. However, it's not designed for or it wasn't initially designed for people like myself that had never studied computer science. And the way that an example that I can give is that that book starts off by explaining how Subversion and Git are different. Now, I entered the world of tech in 2018, let's say, or at least that's when I entered the world of, coding and stuff. I've never used Subversion. I'm never gonna use Subversion. I've never even come across it. So, yeah, you realize that now a lot of the people in the world of tech have different exposures and experiences than people in the past, and that's why it's great that there's such diversity in the teaching space, because different people that have different backgrounds can teach concepts in ways that will resonate with various learners. So yeah, it's the world of tech is changing.
Yeah, when I started out, there was Subversion was a big deal. and it was pretty awful. It's a pretty bad system. And then what happened was, there was there were some proprietary solutions like Perforce, like really geeky like C++ programmers, that were the CTO would be like, we got to use Perforce. And then And then there was the explosion of um, Mercurial versus Git, and those were like the
Mhm.
two kind of like fighting standards. And then Git basically just totally took off. One of the things that's interesting though about the why maybe Git became dominant, obviously the core developer is a brilliant person, but I think GitHub is potentially one of the the reasons why Git also is widely used. I work a lot with GitHub, and I know a lot of the people there. And I told several people at GitHub, I said, GitHub to me is a little bit like Apple,
Mhm.
where it's kind of hard for me to find a product that they produce that I don't like love. Like
Mhm.
and one of the things that somebody at GitHub told me that really resonated with me is they said that the way we design our products from a user experience perspective is that you accidentally fall into the right workflow. And
Mhm.
so I think that was like, okay, well now that makes sense. That's why I like GitHub, because the things I really need to do are easy to do, and the things that are like really weird or whatever are kind of hidden from me.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And just okay, this is the teacher in me coming in. Just for anyone tuning in that doesn't know what GitHub is, it's a hosting service. So basically, the projects that you use Git to version control, you can host them on GitHub. But yeah, this is just me wondering. I don't know exactly who's tuning in, but if anyone is tuning in that didn't know what GitHub was, that's GitHub. So yeah, I guess GitHub must have a really good design team there as well, and they're doing the same thing which I did with my book, which is user feedback, be in touch with your audience, and make sure that you design things very well. Um, yeah, people also when they look at my book, they'll see that design is a big aspect of it. So it doesn't look like most O'Reilly books. It's a bit different. Um, and I wanted to make sure that even just with the way that the information was laid out would allow people to consume the information in a very user-friendly way. And that goes down to the smallest detail of the colors used, the borders on information, and yeah, the presentation of information is really important.
Yeah, one of the people that I've always thought was a very interesting individual was Leonardo da Vinci. And there was a good book written recently by Walter Isaacson about him. And what was interesting is that he's working in several different unrelated domains, but mixing the things together. So, he's painting, he's doing autopsies, he's sculpting, he's building, mechanical instruments for war, but the things are blending together. So I think that's another component of mastery, is that you're able to merge different domains together and techniques together, so like a visualization with technical. So I think that's a very good sign for for a piece of material that you're consuming, is that been approached not just from one perspective of just kind of in a dry way,
Yeah.
putting in it, but you're mixing different domains.
I definitely think that my experience training and working in user experience design 100% affected the way that I ended up then approaching teaching the topic of Git. Um, and it was the fact that I got exposed to these various different domains and how people in these various different domains think and work. And that then the alchemy of those experiences led to this creative idea of teaching Git with colors and storytelling um, and visuals. So I'm definitely a proponent of um, borrowing from various disciplines to create something unique.
So in terms of writing the book, what would you say, if you had to say maybe a couple things that were unexpectedly awesome, and then maybe a couple things that were unexpectedly awful, like or challenging or whatever, what would you say?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. Well, first of all, I'd say that the book took a lot longer than I thought it would. So that was unexpected. I don't want to say whether that was unexpectedly awesome or awful, but very unexpected. Actually, a funny story. I actually wrote the entire first draft of the book on my own without O'Reilly, um, because I wanted to teach Git using the rainbow and colors and visuals. I just thought like this idea is so out there, and I'm not sure that any publisher will really get it. O'Reilly totally embraced the idea later, when I spoke to them, um, and when we ended up signing the contract. But I had had a meeting with them. I knew that they were interested, but then I told them, "Look, I need to go and write this book on my own, the first draft of it, and then I'll come back. I'll probably come back." So I wrote the entire draft on my own, and then once I got in touch with them and started working with them on the book, um, then I thought that it was going to take a lot less time to actually finish it all up because I was like, I already have the first draft ready. It's good to go almost, like just a little bit of editing and we're good to go. And actually, it took twice as long as I thought it was going to take. So that was very unexpected. But it's good that it took that long. First of all, my editors really helped me to make it way better. I mean, I thought it was good, but it still needed a lot of work. Um, and second of all, I actually ended up doing even more rounds of user testing, and again, that really made it much more crisp into the beautiful little book baby that it is today. So that was unexpected. And then what else was unexpected? Oh, that's a really good question. And what was awesome and what was maybe not so awesome. I think one of the awesome things has just been, I mean, at least maybe now I can tell you this isn't so much about the actual book writing journey, but just the way it's resonating with the people it's helping, the people that are learning Git using my book. That has been incredible. I mean, I'm finding people that are posting about it, raving about it. The reviews that I've gotten on Amazon are so wonderful. Like I read them and I'm like, wow, I couldn't have paid for this. I could like I wish, like it's incredible the way that it's helping people. So that has been really amazing to have strangers around the world post about your book without you knowing them, without them even, it's not like they want my attention because they don't even tag me sometimes, but then I'll somehow find their post and I'll be like, wow, I can't believe this person out of their own free will with no agenda just wrote such beautiful things. So that's been unexpected. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes me think about a couple things. One is that, yeah, you know, the feedback or reviews on stuff is always kind of a weird thing because on one hand, you like you said, you spent 2 years working on a book, and I think a lot of times when people review technical, books, if you wrote it yourself, I you have a lot of empathy for other technical, authors. Like, I probably would never review a book less than 3 stars that was technical ever, period, just because unless it was, like, intentionally made to be bad, because the somebody is you learn something from the book, and I think a lot of times when people are reviewing something, they don't really fully take into account, like, that it's rare for people to write technical books, and it's rare for them, especially in your case, they've spent 2 years on it to do this, so you should be encouraging them because otherwise we're not gonna have any good books. So, like, people really should be aware of this when they're reviewing, content. And I
Hmm.
guess the other thing that it kind of reminds me of as well is that really the vision, for when you're doing something technical. I think the way you approached it may be also one of the better ways to write a book, is that it's easy to be influenced by other people unintentionally, and even with the best of intentions, and that for if you're creating something, it's very rare for someone to have a vision that's unique vision. Like in yours is
Hmm.
a very unique vision, and it's easy for someone to basically dissuade you from having a unique vision and I feel like there's something precious about having an original idea, especially if people
Yeah,
don't agree with it. And
yeah.
that's very rare. So the fact that you were able to retain that by first writing it, I think is a very, very good approach for doing creative writing.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, the book writing journey was very much a creative project, especially because I say writing, but there's a lot of, it was making visuals, it was testing, there's a lot of time that you don't spend writing. And actually, speaking of writing, there's not that much writing, there's a lot of editing. Like I said, it was 5 months of getting the first draft and then 14 months of actually editing over and over. I mean, I think I rewrote every sentence in that book like a bajillion times. So, yeah, it's a creative project is a journey in and of itself. It's an emotional journey. It's one where there's times where you're like, um, you're lost or you don't know what the next step is, or um sometimes, for example, especially with user testing or getting feedback from people, it's ready to get feedback from people, but you're procrastinating it because you're like, I don't know if I'm ready to get feedback on this. Because it's always a emotional journey to get feedback on the work that you're doing and to show your little baby to someone and hear if they think it's ugly or pretty. So yeah,
But
it was a journey.
the in a class I teach, I stole this from another class I took when I was in school. But I do this thing where at the end of the semester, you're in a team project and you're required to give three negative but constructive feedback
Yeah. Mhm.
and three positive constructive feedback items. And most people have not actually experienced receiving constructive negative feedback that's personal. And at least in America, we have not done this. But that's what writing, you actually do get
Yeah.
some constructive negative feedback, and that's really the best kind of feedback you can get.
I mean, I was reviewing my journey writing this book and thinking about when I first started working with my developmental editor at O'Reilly and reflecting on some of the feedback she gave me in our first meeting. And at that point, my book was very repetitive. And it took me like a day to reflect on it to really accept the fact that it was repetitive and that there were things that I needed to just slim down and take out. There were entire sections of the book that I had to take out. And actually, speaking of constructive feedback, I mentioned that I have some really, really amazing reviews on Amazon, which I really appreciate whoever wrote those. The very first review I got on Amazon is like 4 paragraphs long, and it's lovely. And then there was some constructive feedback at the end where basically the individual mentioned that there was one topic that I did not cover in the book, which is forking, and he really wishes that I would cover that topic. Um, and I totally agree. I totally agree. Now that I think about it, I totally should have covered that topic. So, feedback it's a really good thing as long as it's delivered in the right way, and in a generous way. It only makes us well, no, it doesn't only, but it can make us get better. And in the next edition of the book, hopefully, I would be able to include that. But if they had never mentioned that, then maybe I wouldn't have thought that, that I should prioritize that whenever we start working on it again.
Yeah, like in that case, if I was writing a review like that for a book, I would probably say, awesome, awesome, awesome. This is great, great, great. Like, I would there if there's one thing I wish was in the book, it would be this and this and this, and then 4 star out of 5. And it's like if it had that, I would give it a 5. Like to me, that's constructive.
I mean,
That's constructive.
that's exactly how it was written,
Yeah,
and he
that's
gave me 5
amazing.
stars, so I was like,
Yeah,
"Yeah,
or
great."
a 5 or whatever. The ones that I like, yeah, I guess I'm old and what's the words?
Disillusioned.
Disillusioned a little bit is like I had a review recently for a book and was like, not a bad book. Like, and it's like, but like I wish it covered C# more. And it's like 2 stars. It's like, wait, like not a bad book.
But 2 stars, ouch.
It means like that's not two, like, or it's not three. That means
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
opposite of bad is good.
Yeah, you know what? I'm so early on in my book journey that I think I haven't yet been scarred by any really, really unfortunate reviews. So maybe we should speak in a year or two again, and we'll see what my thinking is on it at that point.
Well, I mean, I don't even take it seriously. Where
Yeah.
the but I think the kind of, feedback that you got, I think is great.
Yeah.
That's the kind of feedback I think is important to give to authors because again, like why are we sabotaging our own food supply? You're like this is the stuff we need. We need people to write like really cool books. So if you're
Mhm.
not encouraging authors when they're writing their first book, it's like, what are we doing? Like we
Yeah.
have to be encouraging to people. So I'm glad that you're getting a lot of good feedback.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, I've been very lucky, um and I'm excited to get more to find out more about what people want, what people want to learn, and that will also then guide me onto what my next projects will be and what I want to work on, and we'll see.
So that's, yeah, maybe a good segue. Like, what would you say would be a good mechanism for people to get a hold of you, or if they've read the book or they're about to read the book, whatever, and
Yeah.
they got finished with it and they're like, "Wow, this is amazing!" Like, is there more? Like, what can I do, or how can I stay in
Yeah.
touch, or like, what are some ways that people can get in touch with you and continue to keep learning with the
Yeah.
style that you've done, which is a very unique style?
Yeah, that's a really good question. At the moment, the main platform that I'm on is LinkedIn. So I know a lot of people don't like LinkedIn, but that is at the moment the main platform. I do also have a YouTube channel. I have not uploaded much there, but if I do end up making some more instructional videos, they'll be definitely added to the YouTube channel. LinkedIn is the main place, however. Um, and from LinkedIn, you'll be able to find any other links I create. I might be setting up a mailing list. So from my LinkedIn, you'll be able to find out about that. And obviously, you can find the book anywhere. My name is Anna Skoulikari, and I'm the only Anna Skoulikari on this planet. So honestly, if you need to find me, just Google me, and it's me. So for anyone listening, that's ANNA Skoulikari. It's a Greek name. I'm Greek, so yeah, it's complicated. So I thought it'd be good to spell it out. And then yeah, I think if you just Google me, you'll find most of my stuff. I might be making a website soon as well, but that does not yet exist, so I cannot promise. But LinkedIn is the best place to connect with me.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to have met you and had a conversation with you. And I mean, just personally, I definitely am going to recommend your book to students that I teach because it's such a common question is yeah, get is very confusing. What do I do?
Yeah. Please let me know what they say. I love getting
Sure.
feedback. I love learning more about, what's working for them, maybe what's not working for them, or what they would like to see more of.
Sounds good. All right. That's all for now. Talk to everybody later.
All right. Bye.